Hello, my name is Emily Glasgow, and I'm applying for the Director of Early Learning position in PPS. I want to start by telling you a little bit about myself, about my professional and personal journey that has brought me to this point. I am a product of PPS. I'm the daughter of PPS graduates. I am a PPS graduate, and I'm now the parent of two PPS students. My investments in this system are deep and broad. That said, most of my professional experience has been gathered outside of Portland. I've spent the past 21 years working in urban public school systems across the country, largely in schools and school systems that are explicitly focused on serving our most fragile and underserved student populations. During that time, I've had the opportunity to work in 3 different urban public school systems and 1 urban public charter school. Across those systems, I've had the opportunity to work in 8 different school communities. I've worked as an elementary school teacher, as a dean of students and a special education director, and as a pre-K through 8 principal for the past 13 years. Through all of that work and all of that time, my work has always been guided by one central core value and mission, and that is the work of creating inclusive practices that support all children's access to rigorous standards-based learning, which is really what has me so excited about this early learning position, because I think that's really the crux and focus of this work as well. So let me get into that. What is the purpose of a comprehensive P3 system? As I've been thinking about preparing for this interview and for the potential work of this job, I've spent some time in the research, and I wanted to start with a quote that I found in the research on P3 alignment. Early childhood experts assert that the effects of preschool may be sustained and investment in early education capitalized upon if curricula and instructional strategies from preschool through grade 8 are well aligned. So what I really think that means from my own personal experience in pre-K through 8 programs, and also from my time reading through the research, is that we are investing heavily and smartly as a district, as a state, as a country right now in developing high quality pre-K programs to get kids, and particularly kids at risk, into our system sooner, to really try to level the playing field. At the same time, we really have to make sure that the work that we're doing at the pre-K level is extending into the elementary level, that there's a bridge there. Because what we know is that even with really high quality pre-K experiences, students can lose ground if those experiences aren't sustained and grown upon in the early elementary years. So to help myself and potentially to help you understand how I think about the P3 alignment work, I've created this kind of visual map. What I really think this work is about is looking at these different buckets: curriculum, instruction, assessment, environment, which I think captures a whole lot more than just the physical environment. That's the social emotional work, the relationships, the culturally relevant piece, the family community engagements that support the learning environment, and the standards, both academic and social emotional standards. So taking all of those buckets and thinking about, if you see the arrow along the bottom, not just how we take all of the different Portland pre-K programs and models, and we know there's several different models, not just how do we take them and create horizontal alignment, particularly as we add more pre-K opportunities using State Bill 3427, hopefully. So how are we creating horizontal alignment in all these buckets? And then at the same time, how are we pulling the work that's happening at pre-K up into our kindergarten through 3rd grade classrooms, and how are we at the same time pulling the really effective work that's happening in our K through 3 classrooms around GVC and MTSS and the workshop model and all these things, how are we pulling that down? So there's this vertical alignment piece, bridging the divide between our pre-K programs and our K through 3 programs, and then there's the horizontal piece. And those pieces need to really be happening simultaneously in all of these different buckets. And so the overall goal here is to provide all PPS students access to a developmentally appropriate, supportive, coherent, rigorous educational foundation. And I'm using this visual of an escalator to sort of help think about the goal is that this is seamless, that our youngest, most fragile learners are moving up this really intentional, coherent ladder or framework or staircase and that all of these different programs, so they don't need to be cookie cutter programs, are aiming in the same direction, are aiming our students in the same direction toward the same opportunities. And I really believe that multi-departmental and multi-stakeholder investment in this foundation, in our youngest learners, will support the health and success of our entire system. We know from the research how important third grade outcomes are. And so if we can truly invest in not just more, but higher quality and better aligned early childhood and early education programming and get our kids to those third grade benchmarks, we know that the potential outcomes for all of our kids all the way through 12th grade are going to be that much greater and that much more like what we aim for them to be. So all that said, I know that it's really easy to create a graphic organizer with bubbles and to show the staircase. I did want to take a second to just acknowledge that I believe this is really complex work, as any good systems level work is. And so I took this slide just to kind of pop out at kind of first glance with my first thinking what some of the components of this work are, and I'm sure there's more that I don't even know about yet or didn't make onto this slide. So I know that thinking about P3 alignment in Portland includes thinking about federal and state funding, thinking about federal and state policies, thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy and trauma-informed practices, really thinking about developing teachers and staff, both at the pre-K level and at the early elementary level, and ideally together, that there's some cross-learning happening between those levels. I know there's work needed around data systems, that we're working on intentionally pulling down district initiatives like GVC and the MTSS work down into the pre-K programs. I know that it's a really important part of this work is engaging families and community partners and thinking about how do we want families to first experience Portland Public Schools and how do we bring them in as partners. We're thinking about social emotional learning, thinking about how to build the capacity of building leaders, administrators, and also district leaders and administrators, helping them really understand what do developmentally appropriate practices that are standards-based look like for our youngest learners, thinking about what those standards are, as we also think about our special education needs, our English language learners, and other special populations. So I throw all that on one slide and say it really quickly, just to acknowledge that I understand this is really complex work. It's work that is not going to happen quickly. It's going to take multiple stakeholders, and it's going to take time. So then the question is, well, what experience do I have leading organizational improvement and leading complex systems work? As those of you that have reviewed my resume know or have worked with me know, most of my work has come from the seat of principal. So I want to talk a little bit about my experiences first as a principal in Boston and then as my experiences as a principal in Portland. So in Boston, I had the opportunity to be the principal of one school for 7 years, which was wonderful. When I first came to my school in Boston as a principal, it was a traditional single building K-5 school with marked race and disability-based achievement gaps. Over the course of the 7 years I was there, we did some really transformational work. And we became, when I left, and 6 years later, this is still where they are, we became a full inclusion 2-building pre-K through 8 program with no racial achievement gap and a focused lens on supported access for students with disabilities. One of the most exciting parts of this expansion, while I was the principal at the school in Boston, that's most relevant actually to this job, is that we had the opportunity to create an early learning center as part of this work. So when we started to expand and at our middle school and also at our pre-K program, we added a second building, and we were really intentional about who was going to be in that building and what we wanted that building to look like. And so we made a decision to make that our early learning center. So we had our pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade classrooms in that building, and then about a mile away in our big building, we had our 2nd through 8th grade classrooms. And so it was this really amazing experience to think about what would a school look like that was just for 3-year-olds through 7-year-olds? How would that program align seamlessly? How would kids transition from pre-K to K to first grade? But doing all that within the context of this is a larger pre-K through 8 community. And so thinking about standards alignment and the experiences of families moving all the way through that ladder, while also being able to be really intentional about developmentally appropriate spaces and programming for our youngest learners. And I learned a tremendous amount through that process. So the question becomes, since that was such a successful implementation and transformation, how did we do it? So as I reflect on that experience, and I reflect on that experience a lot, I think we did the work we did by engaging multiple stakeholders. And so in that work, it was district leaders, community partners, families, teachers, national agencies, facilities people. There were all kinds of stakeholders that were interested in the work we were doing, and we engaged them in the ways most appropriate. We visited exemplar programs and studied the research. It was really important to me because we were adding several things at once. We were becoming an inclusion program and growing a middle school program and growing an early childhood program. It was important that we looked at what already existed around us, that we learned from the research, and that we went out of ourselves to go see what was possible, right? What should this look like? What are our exemplars that we can try to replicate? We developed a strategic long-term plan. I had to articulate some non-negotiables. There were some things like students with disabilities and students with typical needs are going to be served in the same settings. And then we had to work together to democratically say, if that's a non-negotiable, how are we going to reach that? To do that, we had to realign resources. We had to think really creatively about time, about staff, about space, and use it differently and see it differently and see the possibilities differently. So without more funding, without increased stuff or increased time, we could do education really differently. And we committed to ongoing, coherent, differentiated adult learning with structured data-based reflection. To lift a program to move student outcomes for kids, I truly believe the work has to start with grown-ups. And it has to start with acknowledging what we know and what we need to know, and then being really thoughtful about, well, how do adults learn, right? Like adults, like kids, there's best practices around that, and we need to think about those. How we didn't do it was really cautious not to go too much too fast. We didn't recreate the wheel. Like I said, we did a lot of looking outside of ourselves. We didn't and couldn't work in isolation. There had to be a lot of collaboration, both horizontally and vertically and beyond our site. We certainly didn't work without resistance. There's never space without resistance when you're trying to change and transform and create better outcomes for kids. But there's that dance of how much resistance is too much resistance and how much resistance is expected resistance, and kind of acknowledging the human pieces as you work through it. We did not change out current staff for quote unquote better staff. My staff stayed with me as we grew and really did some transformational learning. And we didn't do any of this work with an expectation of quick fixes or perfection. So the work is not done still, now 13 years after I started that work at that school. They're still undergoing the same work and working through the transformation. And I think that's a really important core component of the improvement science work that PPS has invested in. Transformational work, adaptive work is not quick, and it's really not ever done. But if you're measuring it and if you know where you're going and you're able to track your progress and you're reflective and using data, you can see the growth along the way and really mark and measure it. So taking all that learning, I came back to Portland 6 years ago, and for the past 6 years, I've been a principal in Portland. I was a principal for 4 years at Vestal K-8, and for the past 2 years at Lewis Elementary School. The work that I've done in terms of systems change in both of those schools has really focused in a couple of buckets. MTSS has encompassed a lot of my work at both Vestal and Lewis. In both schools, we started with really looking at the foundational standards-based core, making sure teachers really understood what the principles of the Common Core State Standards were. Also thinking about social emotional learning standards, not just academic standards. In both schools, we were cohort 1 EBBL schools, and so there was a lot of work on the foundations of literacy instruction. In both schools, and particularly at Vestal, we did a lot of work on research-based instructional strategies. When I was at Vestal, we did a lot of work with AVID strategies and student engagement strategies. In both schools, we established from the ground up a SIT process and did a lot of work and spent a lot of time thinking about effective interventions. Again, both academic and social emotional. Social emotional learning, as I keep bringing up, has been a big component of my work in Portland. I was really fortunate a couple years ago to get to join the Portland team that was part of the Oregon State Collaborative around trauma-informed practices. And I was able to do a tremendous amount of learning in that area and have brought that learning back to both schools' communities. And so a lot of our work has been around social emotional learning, PBIS, and restorative justice at all tiers. And that's been really exciting. I really value that work and think it's critical to student success. In both schools, although particularly at Vestal, I've also done a lot of work around family and community engagement. At Vestal, we had the opportunity to create a SUN program from the ground up and create a new partnership with ERCO as a community liaison. And so it was really exciting to be able to think about from scratch, what does a partnership like that look like, and what does a community school truly look like? In terms of improvement metrics, how I have any sense of whether any of that work has worked, here's a couple of bullets. In both schools, Vestal and Lewis, I would say that one could walk around and really see fidelity of core program implementation, particularly around the EBBL work, Readers and Writers Workshop, and some of the supplemental components to that work. In both schools, we were able to reduce exclusionary discipline, which has been an important priority for me. And at Lewis, in our first year and sustained through our second year, our SBAC scores went up in both language arts and math, and our FIT scores in our first year also went up in some really key areas. So taking my experiences as a principal, the question then is, how would I approach the director of early learning position? How would I bring what I know about systems change at the building level to the central level? So I can't give you a roadmap because I have a lot I would need to learn initially, but here's some guiding principles. I would start by knowing what I know and what I need to know. I would recognize that I'm joining work in progress. I know that there are certainly building specific teams that have been working on early childhood and alignment work for many years. And then I also know that more recently there is a team that has come together around P3 alignment with multiple stakeholders. So I would recognize I'm joining that work. I would need to really think about who the cross-sector partners are that are already engaged in that work, think about who else should be at the table, and really work to engage those with knowledge and those with interest in this process. Initially, especially, I would need to do a lot of inquiry, listening, learning, visiting, studying, and I would need to be transparent about those learnings. I think people would need to see me and know me. They would need to know that I've been in their spaces, and then I would need to be able to reflect back to people. Here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm noticing, how does this resonate with what you're experiencing? I would need to engage and assess my team and develop really clear agreements about what our priorities are, what should be getting our time and attention, and who's best suited to do each of those things. I would need to develop clear metrics of incremental success and long-term success, but I think the incremental success is really important. I know that the team that's working on alignment has already been using the Cowers and Kaufman framework, which I think is really smart to both plan and assess. So I'd want to continue and build on that work, making sure that we really get to the level of some very clear, precise, data-based SMART goals, which don't need to be student outcome focused necessarily yet, but things we can measure and look for. And then I'd want to use those metrics to backwards map a strategic professional development plan. The adult learning piece in this is huge if we're really going to change systems and create alignment where there's not so much coherence right now. And so that includes district level learning, senior leadership and TOSAs, making sure that there's real understanding of developmentally appropriate practices for our youngest learners, and then building level learners, administrators, coaches, teachers, classified staff, both in our pre-K programs and in our elementary programs. And I understand there's different management around some of those different programs. And so really collaborating to construct that and bring people to some of the same tables and the same trainings and the same experiences would be really critical here. And so thinking about adult learning, because I think that's so important, I pulled another quote to look at and then some steps of what I would think about and some belief systems I have. So I pulled from some of the Cowers and Kaufman work that I was reading this quote that talks about their framework. It says, "This framework is based on the premise that there needs to be more intentional focus on the changes that need to occur in adult behaviors and skills and to the system itself before meaningful child outcomes will really be realized." And I think that's really key. We often are looking really quickly for student outcomes to change, and we sort of like leapfrog over the step of like, we need adult belief systems and actions and collaborations and systems to change so that the student outcomes can change. And we need to really invest in growing our adults. So to do that, I think we need to develop a really clear scope and sequence of learning targets for adult learning and stick to it. We need to leverage internal capacity. We have people in our system who really know early learning and early learners well, and we need to utilize them to help us lift each other and one another. We need to be very creative, I think, about creating time for meaningful on-site and cross-site collaboration and learning. We need to engage adults in ongoing workshop style instruction, and by that I very much don't mean going to workshops. I don't mean like sit and get. I mean the kind of workshop instruction we do with students, where we target mini lessons, we have clear objectives, we work on those in small chunks with adults, and then we support them in going back to practice with coaching, with feedback, and with time for reflection. I believe in cycles of adult learning that are supported and that are collaborative in that way. And I believe in really building in that support and guided practice, because adults too need time to digest, they need to try things on, they need to see how they look in their own settings, and they need feedback as they go. So I want to close by talking about, just as a human being and as a leader and a colleague, what I would bring to the central office leadership team. I come to all the work I do with a strong equity lens and a focus on students. I have and see a commitment to the big picture, despite challenges, despite frustrations. For better or for worse, I'm an enduring optimist, and I really do believe in the potential of public schools generally and PPS specifically to move students toward equitable outcomes. I can see the whole and attend to the parts at the same time. I'm able to kind of keep the big picture forefront while working on the daily tasks and moving efficiently through them. I have a collaborative spirit. I love to work with other people and debate and hash through things. I believe we lift each other and make each other stronger by doing that. I try to be really transparent about what I need, about what I know, about what I need to know. I approach my work with humility. I know that I don't know it all. I'm strongly committed to learning. That's part of what I love about working in the field of education. It's just we're never done. And this new opportunity of Director of Early Learning would really give me a lot of opportunity to learn and to grow in some new and more focused areas. I bring humor. I think we need to laugh together about our work. This is hard work and it's human work. I bring perspective. I bring a lot of different experiences, and I've seen a lot of what's possible in different places. And I bring persistence. I don't stop. I won't ever sort of crumble, right, when we're moving through things. This is hard work, this is complex work, and I will stick with it. So thank you for listening. I hope to get the opportunity to approach this work from a different seat with you. Thanks.